Okay, I'm very happy to have Miles Vining here. And Miles, could you please welcome first of all to our channel, and I would like to welcome you. Could you please introduce yourself a bit to our viewers of this channel, just about your interest in firearms or historical firearms and so on, please?
Thank you very much, sir. It's an honor to represent Silah Report on your channel as well, and I really appreciate the opportunity. My name is Miles Vining. I co-founded Silah Report in 2017 with a good friend of mine, Hiracha Hirapet, and we've been focusing on small arms in the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia in terms of looking at the role of firearms from a political, from a historical, from a religious point of view, looking at contemporary usage, looking at historical usage, and Silah Report was sort of became a thing as my concurrent interest of firearms and my interest in the region sort of came together. And I said, there's a lot of very fascinating indigenous sources on the ground here, and stuff that we can look at, and I wanted to bridge that gap, that a niche that was seen that wasn't being covered in a lot of the areas that I was finding myself in terms of firearms research in the United States, where mostly a lot of my research background comes from.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as you know, my area of research is Persian arms and armor, Iranian arms and armor. Specifically, as you know, I start from Bronze Age and then, edged weapons, and not only edged weapons, any type of weapons, arms and armor. And it includes just also later on firearms. The firearms I'm mostly interested in, or is an area of my research, there are two types. First of all, the collection, a royal collection of Iranian museums, which belonged to what you see, for example, in my last book. They belonged to Nassereddin Shah Qajar, and this is his personal collection. And you should know that this collection was collected over generations from one king to the other. But I will explain later on if you're interested. So I analyzed the inventory. There are in this book, you can see 100 items of them, 100. And there are, pieces of art, right? These are really magnificent things. But it's not only that. I also, in this book, I did lots of cross-referencing and analyzing. But what I'm always interested in is not so much anecdotes, who said what, who said that, like, for example, European travelers back then or this and that. This book, I translate for the first time, technical translations of 3 manuals on firearms, and in English. So I translated from Persian into English. One of them is about how to cast cannons from Safavid period. So, some of them in some articles, they mention about it, but no one translated the whole thing. So I translated it, how they cast cannons, which is very interesting. And then another one is about rockets. It's based like on colonel Congreve rockets. And this is the Persian version, where Mohandes Tabrizi talks about rockets, how they should be built, which is extremely interested from, those old rockets, right? From Persian point of view, Iranian point of view. And then I also translated and annotated another manuscript, also by another engineer, Tabrizi, but they have the same last name. But this is another one who talks about cannons, who talks about howitzers, about mortars, about many other things in another book. So I translated. And the thing is, these translations, what I did not only translate the technical parts, I translated from the beginning, where they praise the king, where they praise why they wrote this, because this is the whole thing which gives us an understanding about that. And besides, I also measured and analyzed all those beautiful pieces of firearms where you can see in my book. I'm mostly interested in handmade items, of course, because Iran has had a very long tradition of making magnificent, for example, swords or armor like crucible steel, and also welded steel, and it is transferred to firearms as well. You can see indigenous, locally made barrels, for example. I mean, what a beautiful welded steel. You see gold inlaying, gold overlaying. From this technical point of view, I mean, from aesthetic point of view, not only technical, you see beautiful pieces of art, which I'm really interested in. And of course, I have translated in this book 3. I have over 125 firearms manuals, which still I need to work on. So you can imagine what kind of wealth of information I have, which provides us, like in military science, because as you know, I mean, I'm sure, as you know, this is your field as well. Military science, as in any culture, is not only military, every culture, we repeat our patterns, our modus operandi. It's very interesting to watch that. Cultures repeat modus operandi, and it's military is no different. As we know that. So you can gain lots of information about how they did these things and that, and why they think that way from their point of view, of Iranian point of view back then and Persian point of view. So that's what I did the research on. And okay, these are like in the catalog part, like this is the theoretical part, and then there is a catalog part at the end where you can see also 12 items. These 12 items are from Engineering Corps and Artillery Military Museum in St. Petersburg, where a colleague of mine, when I was in Russia, he kindly provided me with pictures of 12 Persian items, because there were howitzers and there were also mortars which were taken as war booty when Russians and Persians fought in 2 wars. So because I was looking for some missing information, so then you can find it here as well. But as I mentioned, these type of research, I'm very interested. I don't only do that, possibly, I don't want to change the topic. With my colleague Pete Dwyer, we do lots of archery. I translated lots of archery manuscripts, and I have lots of them, and also crucible steel manuscripts. I'm translated, but I'm writing a book only on crucible steel manuals. The good things about these manuals is it provides you information about mindset of people from the culture and region back then, not about a European traveler who traveled there. I'm not saying it's bad, because I also mentioned European travelers, don't misunderstand me. But it is like, you traveled a lot to different countries. It's always a different thing. If I travel to another country and think those guys think that way, or to find out what those guys really think, there are 2 different types of things to talk about and to consider. So that's why, when I say original research in this field, I'm into this and analyzing and doing these type of things. What we have are different types here. There are matchlocks, of course. You can see Persian, Iranian matchlocks. You can see the same as in Europe, flintlock and percussion cap systems. Then you have pistols, muskets, and different and cannons as well, howitzers, mortars, things like that.
Well, there's so many tangents that you just mentioned there, and as you're opening your book, I was like, wait, I want to, can I look into the screen anymore? Like that. I would love to have it in front of me and just ask you about it. Unfortunately, I'm in China here, and I want to order it to get back to the U.S., and I can't wait to get back to the U.S. to actually see it. I wish I had discovered your work, a year or 2 ago instead of here in China on a movie set. But there's so many different tangents that I was just, going back and forth and stuff like that. And I mean, one of it that you mentioned, the modus operandi, and that's something that really fascinates me in terms of historical research, in that I think anywhere in the world, right? You're facing any industry, any inventing or any science anywhere, you're facing the same problems, and everything is cyclical. And even today, you face the same problems as before, but how you approach those problems is tied into, what materials you have at your disposal, and, what's around at that time. And I mean, I can think of, flashlight development, and we think of, weapon mounted flashlights. Today, we think of, these weird, these small tactical lights that go on weapons that allow us to see in the dark. Well, if we roll back the clock 200 years ago, we see examples of flintlock and percussion handguns, hand cannons, so to speak, and we can find examples with lanterns mounted on them. And it's like, the problem of how do we defend ourselves in the dark, or how do we assault something in the dark with a firearm? It's not a new problem. What we're limited to is, the resources that we have. So that's something I always like to bring up. It's like, we don't think, the latest surefire today, that's, the first time people have stuck a light on a firearm. It's the same thing with stuff like this. What I would like to get into is, so something I've seen, and I'm so glad and so grateful for your research about looking into the Persian side of the matchlocks, the flintlocks, and the percussion cap. But I think within the arms and armor genre, I think in Western research, so to speak, Western research, right? But say like looking at the Met, or looking at the Met Museum in New York, or looking at the Chicago Art Museum School of Art, they have a big arms and armor collection. Or looking at in the UK, or a lot of what ties it in is we see the genre within arms and armor of, Oriental arms and armor or Islamic arms and armor. And I'm looking at it from a technical perspective from small arms, and I look at, the Islamic arms and armor, of these collections, or of other books out there, right? And it's like the Islamic arms and armor is grouped everywhere from, Morocco all the way to India, to the Mughals in India. And it's like, it's all grouped together in occasional ways. And I'm looking at that, I'm saying, wait, hold on a second, but we have flintlocks, and we have giselles or tortopaks in Afghanistan. We see attributes of these flintlocks and percussion rifles that you don't see in Pakistan, that the stocks are different, that the styles are different. We see rifles in the Arabian Peninsula that have nothing to do with what's happening in Afghanistan. We see rifles and muskets in North Africa that have nothing to do with what's happening elsewhere. There isn't this pan-Islamic arms and armor. It's not like that all happened together. What happened in the different regions was very unique to that region, and what that region needed and specified within the design of their rifles and their muskets in there. And it's not this pan-Islamic arms and armor like the Muslims of North Africa and India had a committee and said, this is how we're going to design our arms this way. It's, it's nuanced in this way. And that's something I'd like to highlight at Silah Report. And especially I'd like to know from your aspect is what makes, Iranian and Persian flintlocks, matchlocks, and percussion arms, in the Qajar period, in the Safavid period, what stands out, and what are the unique attributes that we need to pay attention to and say, okay, this is more of a Safavid design, this is more of a Qajar design, and this is why it's not Afghan, and this is why it's not Arabian, so to speak.
This is before I go in, it's a very difficult question without showing any pictures or making a comparative study. But just regarding Islamic arms and armor, let me just mention something to you. Years ago, it was really years ago, before I published my first book. My first book was published in 2006. And I was in arms and armor from Iran, but back then I didn't include firearms. It's a very huge book. And before I published that book, I mentioned in many conferences or also in some discussions that the very term of Islamic arms and armor is a wrong term. And of course, many people were angry at me, especially, in the West. Okay, I have been living in the West. As you might know, I lived in Germany and United States. So that's what I mean, the West. So most of my life, right? I left my country of origin as a young teenager. But then the thing is for me, which is very interesting, they were really angry. But let us look at it this way, because you know the region well, so you know that's wrong. And let's put it this way for our viewers, which I have been repeatedly saying. That's why I don't say Islamic. Let's look at it this way. I'm a native speaker of Persian, Farsi. As a native speaker of Persian, if you go and say Silah Islami, everyone would laugh at you. If you go and say Tofang Islami, everyone not only laughs at you, Shamshir Islami, it is an insult. It is like I go to a church and I say, where is a Christian sword here? Right? Christian sword, Christian swordsmanship. But here they were talking Islamic swordsmanship. Islam is a religion. But the justification was, I remember back then, in Islam, sword back then was an article of faith, but so was in Christianity. When you look at the European swords, they have a cross. This symbols the cross for all these European knights who went to the Crusades. So if you go and look at it, clearly, you see in Turkey, in Iran, Mughal India, whatever, Afghanistan, everywhere you go, no one used this term. In my opinion, this term was used for different reasons. I don't want to, okay, let's be very careful and put it this way. Different reasons. First of all, it is always easier to lump things together. Now, I teach intercultural management at the university, and I always tell my students, do not lump and put them together. Let me just mention this. You as an American might know Middle and South America. Many years, Latin Americans, could you please tell me what is the similarity between Argentina and Mexico? What is the similarity between Argentina and Mexico? Yeah, anyone who speaks Spanish, and I'm fluent in Spanish, and I know Middle and South America very well. They're so different, right? What is the similarity between these two countries? And they speak even the same language, Spanish, right? The only country, as we know, which is Portuguese. But when we come to Middle East, Persian is an Indo-European language. Arabic is a Semitic language. Turkish belongs to Turkic languages. Even the background of languages are different. In Middle and South America, Portuguese and Spanish have the similar Romance languages, but they're still, you cannot compare, even in Spanish. Then you need to ask yourself, why, when it comes to the Middle East, all of a sudden, Islamic arms and armor? So, because, those guys on that side and we on this side. And now why does it hinder us, or is it really prevents us from looking at it from military point of view? Let's put it that way. Do I need to tell you, when Ottomans were attacking Europe, I'm not saying it's good or it's bad, Safavid Persia was in alliance with some European powers. Why? Not because they loved Europe, because they had mighty Ottoman Empire to fight against. Like today, if you come and look at all so-called Islamic countries, you always wrongly believe they have had an alliance all years, all centuries, and now we in the West are facing those guys, right? So it is an old concept. Unfortunately, an old concept which coming, let's say, from Crusades, where they called everyone a Saracen. What is a Saracen? Mostly they were fighting against Turkish warriors, right? The Turkish warriors, they called them Saracens. What the hell, excuse me, does it mean Saracens, right? Kurdish, Turkish warriors, and some Arab warriors. Yes, but the thing is, when we come back and look at the whole development, see that it is very restrictive from cultural point of view, very restrictive from military point of view. And so it comes also in analyzing, as you rightly mentioned, what is the similarity culture-wise between Morocco and Afghanistan? And material culture is the same thing. What is the similarity, right? What is that, right? It is like, and unfortunate, and I've really started to say no, Persian arms and armor, Iranian arms and armor, for this reason. In the beginning, I got lots of heat because people didn't like it in the West, because and nowadays more and more people are distancing themselves from Miles, from a very, very important point of view. Let's put it this way. In order to understand, imagine this clearly, go to Tehran, go to Istanbul, go to Ankara, let's say go to Riyadh, go to New Delhi, go everywhere, right? Or go to Karachi, go everywhere. And there is a conference, academic conference. Let's see. You sit there and they speak in English. So everyone understands. Okay. And now imagine one speaker from one of those countries I mentioned is holding a speech and say, ladies and gentlemen, please take a look at this. These are Christian arms and armor. The center of production of Christian arms and armor was Toledo in Spain, where Christians produced many Christian swords. Christian swords were also produced in Germany, right? In Solingen. Christian arms and armor were produced in Passau. Christian arms and armor, and so you would look at me. Imagine we look at each other. What the hell? These guys should be crazy. But the thing is, no one in the Middle East or in that region talks like that. No one. They say Italians produce armor, Germans did that, Spanish did that, whatever, Sheffield in English, Sheffield, and this and that. So why when it comes, such a huge region, as you mentioned that, it's so many different languages, so many different cultures, backgrounds, material culture, put it there and then try to look for similarities. We always say it, Miles, as you know that, if you really want, you always find similarities. Because then, in that case, it is easier to look at it. I can find similarities between Chinese and Persian art. Of course, Chinese art has had influence on Persian art had influence on Chinese art. So let's call them, find a general term for both. Of course, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't do that. We cannot do that. And I think this was one of the biggest thing, one of the biggest problems which we find. The only thing they didn't make it, I think for that, China was too big to make such a mistake, and Japan was isolated for centuries, so that's why they separated them. Otherwise, then there's Islamic and then Southeast Asian or whatever, everything is in block, everything is block, and I don't think that it will help us to understand. Because then again, as you mentioned, we talked about it, when we come to Europe, we have clear-cut differences between different cultural regions and backgrounds. And hey, let's look at it. Look at the size of Europe. And look at the size of Asia and Africa, right?
Yeah.
So Europe is such a tiny place. But here we make differentiations. But in such huge areas, they're all lumped together. So I fully agree with you that this is the problem. Regarding, I mean, when firearms were introduced, as you might know that, I mean, this is always mentioned this was a battle of Chaldaran between Safavid Persia and also Ottomans, where Shah Ismail lost in spite of his bravery and all these things. He lost, and but as I write it also in my book, it doesn't mean that Safavid Persians, even Shah Ismail the first, didn't know about firearms. He actually knew. Even we have in Persian chronicles, they talk about firearms from Timurid period. Also in Timurid, even they talk about it back then, right? And we also have definitely during, I mean, these ruler of Al-Khanyulu in Persian, they also had, you know, for example, during the Uzun Hasan, which was, he ruled from 1378, I think, no, excuse me, Al-Khanyulu era was from 1378, if I'm not mistaken, to 1501. Even during that area, or excuse me, era, period, they from Venice in Italy, today's Italy, they sent bombardiers and matchlocks, siege weapons. So back then in regional sphere of Persia, so they already existed. And then the question was for us as historians, why, for example, Shah Ismail didn't choose to use it, because then Shah Tahmasp, who came after him, he used it and he was successful against Ottomans again, firearms. He didn't use it because there are different opinions on it. One of the most important part is, okay, at least from Persian point of view, one part which we can find in Persian sources, that he didn't find it very, let's say, it was not brave enough to do that, right, for him. So when they fought with swords and with let's say, with bows and arrows, and they were very fast. They had never lost a war. But Ottomans they even broke 2 lines of Ottomans, but Ottomans, they were outnumbered them. They were very good at firearms. Of course, they defeated them. But after that, his son Shah Tahmasp introduced firearms. You can find some examples of the Shah Tahmasp era matchlocks, but from Shah Abbas, where he had some military advisors from England. They say there were Shirley brothers, but again, their opinions differ if they were really there or not. But fact is, they had military advisors, Europeans, and military advisors came to Iran, and then they had it. And then you see that it's very interesting, especially on flintlocks and matchlocks. In my book, you can see them. Persians are very good at making things by hand. First, they imported the matchlock mechanisms. And Europeans were very surprised to see, also from the sources, they were so good at imitating, like Japanese, by hand, right? But sometimes you can tell by the lion which were factory made, imported from Europe, and which were handmade, made by Persians. I mean, in my book, you can see that, right? And then, even if we have Europeans who reported, they make such barrels by hand. They are so good, the barrels, and you see that. But again, the steel making or iron and steel making in Iran has had a very long tradition. And I'm not saying this, let's put it this way, it's really not nationalistic, and I'm not like that at all. But one thing is very important, and everyone agrees on that. If you look at Persian blades, because they're crucible steel, because they're welded steel, but still steel making, Persian blades, all neighboring nations loved Persian blades. Everyone wanted to have a Persian shamshir, be it Indians, be it Mughal Indians, although they produced many good weapons, be it Ottoman Turks, even up north Russians and Arab states, all wanted to have it. So this tradition, you see that it was transferred also to how they made barrels, how they gold inlaid them, overlaid them. And also then, regarding mechanisms, like flintlock, also matchlock, some of them, matchlocks and flintlocks, and also percussion cap, some of them are locally made, and some of them were imported. And right. And then as far as stocks are concerned, I mean, of course, the stocks of Ottomans, they're a bit wide. The Persian ones, normally they're not that wide, like they're like the Caucasian ones, they're really not, not very slender, but you know what I mean. They look different. They don't look like Ottoman or like Algerian or things like that. And basically, the way you can tell by the way the barrels are made. Again, like the Persian swords, I mean, if you know the crucible steel, and here you can know the welded steel, you can find many examples. Also give examples of how welded steel were named, right, in Persian. And this is what you can tell, right? And also regarding firearms mechanisms, handmade ones and European import, you can also tell after you handle many of them and look at them.
So here's a question. I mean, I don't know, a lot of questions I've got, but in terms of what you mentioned, something very important, technology transfer, because gunpowder is invented in China, and then there's rocket technology in China, and then it goes along the Silk Road, which Persia is, key intersection right on that road, and then keeps on going to Europe. And then we have matchlock and flintlock, these different eras, and wheel lock as well. So the mechanisms, in terms of the more advanced mechanisms with the matchlock and the flintlock, those were well established to be of European